welcome everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rima Grishmanowska, and I have worked in rule of law development cooperation since about 2012, first as a practitioner and then as a researcher at Tilburg University. And in my practice and research, I saw a lot of changes in this past decade, 12 years, which I'm sure a lot of you will recognize as well, in how donors, international NGOs, and local actors approached partnerships. I saw, as many of you probably as well, a paradox. Although there were a lot of significant rhetorical shifts towards localization, people-centered justice, the hashtag Shift the Power movement, and many other initiatives, the shifts did not often translate into meaningful change. And a lot of thought was put into that by researchers and practitioners, and recent shock to the system also showed that these conversations are really important, and we need to keep having them. So going a little bit back in time, 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, in 2023, together with Thrive Institute and with the support from the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law, Maria and I started a project to explore and search for answers to this paradox. So during this project that was on an intersection of policy and practice, we had a privilege to speak to a lot of practitioners, some donor organizations, and to dive deep into academic and gray literature on the topic of localization, local development, specifically in the rule of law area. And we produced a report that hopefully you had a chance to skim or to download, and maybe you can read it later after the meeting if you haven't done so. So in this report, we that was presented to the policymakers, we presented a few assumptions that shape how we think about rule of law cooperation. Because why we started with assumptions? Because we felt these were this was the most important starting point. So talking directly about the tools, the solutions, without addressing those is would be skipping a few steps. So we started from analyzing and unpacking those assumptions that we found in all the documents, literature, and the conversations that we had. So first assumption was the myth of rule of law universality. So the assumption that was formed mostly by Western liberal democracies or former liberal democracies in as a universal value that can be transplanted, that can be just copy pasted in different contexts. So obviously this is not true, and we in the report we go in depth unpacking different approaches that exist to multitude of rules of law. Obviously, since the release of this report in November 2024, we have witnessed a big shift and a departure from liberalism and liberal values in some of the Western democracies too. And we're still to see how this will impact the rule of law cooperation in terms of the content, in terms of the values that accompany the process. Second assumption is the assumption that development cooperation is inherently neutral, that is benevolent, and that this assumption is dangerous because it perpetuates the power imbalances in the system. Even with best intentions, localization, we found that localization and locally led development often was performative. It was ticking the box of a kind of a new shiny notion, a new kid on the block, without really redistributing actual decision-making authority or resources. And in the report, we make it very clear that localization cannot be meaningful unless we address this structural power imbalances first. And this is, of course, especially important in the current big power redistribution era that we live in the past few months. And the third assumption, finally, is that there is a persistent undervaluing of local knowledge and capacities, and a patronizing of local actors when they're seen as implementers of external visions of somebody else's plans, values, and initiatives, rather than leaders of their own justice, rule of law, and development processes. So after analyzing these assumptions, we tried to come up with solutions, things that academics often skip this part. So in this project, we luckily had the opportunity to go a step further, and we came up with the idea of targeted and incremental steps. And this approach means that it means that acting from within the existing system to transform it, using adaptive management, people-centered tools, and power-aware partnerships. So it means that the opposite of what has been happening with a few big donors, but we're still hopeful that this approach can be adapted and can be used by the players that are staying in the field. So our key recommendations include, first, centering the ethics of development cooperation that challenges this neocolonial dynamics and prevalence and power imbalances, and that puts mutual accountability in the center in the partnerships. Second recommendation is moving beyond traditional project cycles through adaptive programming and adaptive delivery. And if you're interested in what it means exactly in practice, I invite you to read that part in the report, where we go in greater detail about it. And the third recommendation is shifting to adaptive governance, which means that local actors are not just have a seat at the table, but they shape the table itself, or perhaps choose a different type of furniture to sit at. So we just to summarize and to open the floor for the conversation, we saw that we need to challenge the fundamental assumptions that guide our work in rule of law, localization, and so that it doesn't remain just another trend. And especially now, in times of crisis, I think it is a chance, an opportunity as well to reassess power dynamics and to create new ones that serve the sector and all actors in it better. Thank you for your attention, and now I give the floor back to Kiran for the rest of today's agenda.
Thank you, Rima, and thank you for your insights on the report. I actually just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions. How did you feel? Because for the policy brief, we actually connected with a greater number of scholars and other researchers. How do you feel that the policy brief helped translate some of the ideas from the report? And do you feel like there's anything from there that you would actually like us, or at least the group here today, to consider as they move forward in their own practice?
Yeah, thank you, Kiran. I think the main, well, when we released the report just in time, just before a big, I would say, revolution started to happen in the sector. So it's really difficult, I think, now to assess what tools are still valuable, what tools are still can be used in the current situation. However, I think the main takeaway and the main our main idea from the report and recommendations still stands, is to use indeed targeted and incremental steps approach, and not to aim to revolutionize for a big revolution in the system. Also, I must mention that we came up with a research agenda, because what we realized during this project, which was quite limited in the scope and in time, and what we could do in that limited time, we proposed a research agenda, and I think it's really important to bring researchers, academic researchers, and practitioners together at the table, because critical legal scholarship has been talking about these developments and about proposing certain tools and solution for decades now, and now that practice is catching up, but also going through huge transformations. I think scholarship and researchers can be a big resource for practice and vice versa. So if you're also curious to hear more ideas on research agenda, please go and consult the policy brief. It's a separate document a shorter document that we prepared specifically for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. And there is a detailed research agenda that we suggest, especially to evaluate partnerships and how they're structured, because we stand by the fact that mutual accountability, even if it doesn't revolve around finances, it revolves around other values and processes and ideas, it's still central for successful rule of law implementation. So please take a look at policy brief if you're interested in these ideas, and if your organizations are looking into research ideas, please consider that.
Thank you, Rima. And welcome to anyone who's just joined. I think I saw a few people joining the conversation. So welcome. Um, we we've already heard from Rima and in regards to the report that was produced last year on shifting discourses, rule of law and cooperation. The report is available in the chat if you would like to have a look. And we also, Rima, just discussed the policy brief that we put together with a group of scholars from the Netherlands, from various institutions, which we wrote for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So please do also have a look at that. And I agree with Rima that it was interesting that a lot of our discussions, I remember from the workshops with the ministry, were focused on questions around risk, particularly fiduciary risk, questions around corruption. And yet when we had wider conversations, it also came back to this idea that Rima brought up around mutual accountability. And I found those two contrasting ideas being really interesting. What do we mean by mutual accountability? Who are we being accountable to? And how are donors also demonstrating accountability? I hope these kind of conversations also come up a little bit later in our chat. I'm going to hand over in a second to Andrew Solomon, we're very lucky to have today with us. Andrew's worked for about 3 decades, if I understand, in the legal and judicial reform areas more broadly. Most recently, he was senior rule of law advisor at the USAID. And his work focuses primarily, I understand, on people-centered justice and legal empowerment. And he has experience across the regions. From what I understand, you've got quite an extensive CV, Andrew. It's hard to summarize it all. But you've also worked at the UNHCR, the OSCE, and the American Bar Association. Currently, Andrew is developing a rule of law collab, which I find really intriguing as a means to connect justice actors, but I think importantly, inventory the key justice innovations and reports in order to preserve knowledge. I think this is a really fantastic initiative, and hopefully you can also tell us a little bit about it. Today, he will focus on the question of where do we go from here? So, Andrew, please tell us, where are we going?
Okay, thanks, Karen, for including me in this discussion today. I think it clearly comes, as has been suggested, at a critical time for rule of law and justice reform, given the disruption in international development cooperation that affects so many of us. And I do believe the disruption is in large part a direct result of the abrupt and the chaotic destruction of USAID, and with it, the sweeping and the very messy termination of most of its global programming, including rule of law programs. And with regard to rule of law, the lone exception to the termination seems to be a rule of law program in Guatemala that apparently survived and will be managed by the State Department because it has a migration component that links directly to US law enforcement and databases. So I think that speaks for itself, res ipsa loquitur. And I should add that the cuts to USAID's overall funding, and that's estimated, at about $43 billion, of which we think $540 million was for rule of law. It not only ended the programs, but it also dislocated hundreds, thousands of people, USAID personnel and partners alike. These are the people that spent years and decades developing the technical expertise, building the capacity, and investing in the learning that's needed to do rule of law more effectively. So I think one of the important tasks ahead, we will need to find ways to ensure that this human talent and knowledge and the organizational capacity, particularly at the local level, is not permanently lost. And I would also add that in many ways, how USAID was shut down and how it ghosted so many partners undermine the hard-earned trust that took years to build. And addressing this should also be a priority. Compounding all this harm, we're also dealing with the funding cutbacks recently announced by the Netherlands, the UK, maybe Germany, and others in the global north. And I encourage people to take a look at the OECD study on ODA, or Overseas Development Assistance, that's recently out. Their findings are that in 2004, ODA broadly fell by 7.1%. And that was the first drop after 5 years of consecutive growth in overall ODA. But for rule of law assistance, what I think a lot of us know, the recent cuts in the US and elsewhere are part of a downward trend that's seen a 30 to 40% decrease in funding over the most recent decade. So add to the task list, making the economic case for investing in rule of law and justice reform. So on the whole, though, the last 6 months, and we are almost at that exact 6-month period, the last 6 months have been consequential and unprecedented in the disruption of development cooperation, the decline of overseas development assistance, the dislocation of the talent. These are game changers that are certainly going to exacerbate the pre-existing rule of law challenges that we've long sought to overcome. And they are very likely to create new ones that we will see soon enough. So 6 months in, since the US began the cutbacks and the disruption, we are still in the early days. But I do not think it's not too soon to start rethinking and reimagining how we might design, deliver, and finance rule of law assistance and justice system reform to meet the new moment. Definitely not going to be easy, but let's be real. It's never been easy for our work in rule of law. But I do believe we have some good practices, the knowledge and the thinking that has developed in recent years that we can build upon to move forward. And just briefly, I'm thinking about we're better applying good development practice in this sector through theories of change, complexity awareness, other good practices. The shift to people-centered justice systems and services, has been significant with the greater investments in data, justice data, and evidence, along with more experimentation and more innovation in the justice systems, including better use of tech and digitalization. Also, more focus on cost-effective best buys in frontline justice services. So I do think a lot has been developed and achieved in recent years, and it gives us something to build upon and work with. Other development sectors, health, economic growth, education, they are well into this process of dealing with the disruption and charting new ways forward. So it is imperative for rule of law, justice, and security, to do the same. And I do think today's gathering is an important part of the effort. And the Shifting Discourses report really helps point us in the right direction. I think it gives an informed critique of the state of the field, from the assumptions that have guided the decision-making to the approaches and to many of the activities themselves. I think it's effectively analyzed where we've been, and it describes the elements of a new framework and a new approach that many rule of law donors and practitioners alike have been really trying to develop, and I think would agree is long overdue. The questioning of the long-standing assumptions in the report and the default approaches of rule of law assistance is welcome. I'm thinking about how we have been really top-down, externally driven, institution-focused, and also the highly legalistic, formalistic, and indeed the Western orientation to our work that does perpetuate, in some cases, existing power dynamics, and often falls short in meeting the justice needs of societies. In donor circles, I have to admit, I've seen the default to the familiar models and approaches like these. And really, despite being well-intentioned, I think many are not all that effective in understanding the local system, defining the problem set, and empowering and partnering with the local stakeholders in designing and delivering the solutions together. I also think the report rightly recognizes that for far too long we have tended to treat rule of law deficits as technical problems that can be solved with technical activities. The standard menu of more laws, more courts, more lawyers, more ethics codes and disciplinary mechanisms, more case management, and of course, more trainings. This definitely resonates with me and my experience. I've seen how otherwise technically sound projects, including maybe some I've designed, have fallen short due to the lack of political will, and because we did not sufficiently take into account who might win and who might lose from the proposed activity. I do think we've gotten better in thinking and working politically in rule of law activities, but it's not always happening throughout the project cycle. It has to be more systematized. And I do think in terms of the project cycle, I like how the report, as has been mentioned, recognize that systemic change takes time, especially in the justice sector, and how the report advocates for the targeted and the incremental approaches to navigate the uncertainty. This resonates with me, having dealt with and designed many overly prescriptive and rigid programs. So I've learned we need more flexibility, more adaptive approaches, greater uses of the inception period, the pause and the reflect, to help us deal with the complexity of justice systems. And this gives us obviously the ability to course correct, but I also think it gives us the space and the ability to experiment and to innovate in finding solutions to justice problems. And then, lastly, it's really good to see the report affirm the shift towards people-centered justice and localization, where community justice needs drive the design, and where we are shifting the focus from building state institutions for their own sake to capacitating them to better meet the everyday needs and priorities of local communities. And I do think there's a lot of rhetoric and performative approaches that in this regard, but we have started that effort. We can see it. Now we need to learn more from this effort. Just in wrapping up, I'm sensitive to time. I think we navigate the shifting terrain first by staying the course, by mainstreaming people-centered justice, including the data-driven approaches, learning from that, continuing to empower and improve our efforts to empower local actors in co-creation, design, and implementation. Keep applying those good development practices that I think as a sector, as lawyers, in many ways, we long resisted, especially thinking and working politically. We need to catalyze the stakeholders and the coalitions we need to advance justice reforms. And that includes facilitating that sectoral collaboration to integrate justice in other sectors. So let's stay the course. But we also need to explore that more simplified and cost-effective activities. I also think we need to think and do more rapid response and catalytic activities with more emphasis on partnering to incubate and to scale justice innovation, and more investments in the shared learning and the action, particularly among the global South. And then I think last but not least, we need to develop new and more innovative and inclusive financing models. We need to find the ways of pooling donor funding, what remains, doing the blended public sector financing, and then linking, obviously, the funding and the financing to scaled outcomes. Definitely easier said than done. Other sectors are experimenting, and other sectors are trying it. We have to do it. All things considered, though, I do remain realistic about the challenges ahead, particularly in the immediate terms, but I'm also relatively optimistic over the longer terms. If we can prepare, if we can plan, and we can act accordingly, and I think this discussion and the report help us do that. So thanks for staying with me.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm sure that the others have quite a few questions for you. If you do have questions for Andrew, please do put them into the chat. We'll be addressing them all together once we've also heard from Yasser. Andrew, I would like to ask you just a quick question. So I imagine your experience in the field, you've had to really address a lot of the political issues, and this has been ongoing for you. I don't think it's just happened in the last year. What interests me is, what do you think about balancing the different political interests when it comes to implementing localization? One of the things that I've experienced working with refugees and stateless communities and community-led organizations is that often terms such as localizations have been used in a way which places a burden on the communities to pick up actions and to provide support of when they're in states of precarity. A lot of the work I do is very grassroots, and we research with refugee organizations who choose their own paths. But one of the biggest challenges for us is trying to get stability in terms not only in funding, but also concrete support. So is localization still a term that has value moving forward? If we're genuinely moving towards people-centered justice, are there other terms? Is localization itself something which is community-led, do you think, could be fostering resilience, or does it still have those top-down elements? How do you feel about it, given your experience?
Sure, happy to take a swing at that. I do have to say, I was listening to a podcast a couple days ago. I believe it was from DevX, where one of the commentators said that the concept of localization is quaint now in the context of the disruptions to development. I think there's something there, but in terms of my concern is that localization suddenly becomes a way of not just shifting the power, but shifting the burden. As particularly donors in the global north, cut back in their funds, they use localization to say, well, now, here you go, solve the problems, and including the financing, without, I think, the adequate capacity or support provided. So it is indeed a balancing act in my experience when we engage and seek to support these processes. We have our accountability structures, our longstanding partners that we work with, but in the effort to work with local actors, including government and non-government, and to diversify that. There's a lot of calculations that go into that, and perhaps that's one reason why, at least for USAID, we fell short in the targets. And welcome people who know that the reasons for that, to join the conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing, and it's been very insightful. So I think this leads quite nicely into our next intervention from Yasser Musa Kime. Yasser has really kindly agreed to speak to us today from Nairobi, where he leads a citizenship and land program from his grassroots and community-led Nubian Rights Forum. His work focuses primarily on statelessness, citizenship, and it's very much grounded in deep community engagement. So he plays also quite a key role in the global movement against statelessness. I think Maria will also send a link to that if anyone's interested. And hopefully today he's going to be explaining to us a little bit about the challenges of navigating this complex funding landscape that Andrew has also described from the perspective of the community-led and particularly stateless groups. Yasser, I'm just going to.
Hello, guys. I'm trying to put on my video, but it's not working. So it's telling me Zoom is unable to detect the camera, so I don't know what's happening. Anyway, as I'm looking for how to show my face, my apologies if I won't be able to be seen. But thank you so much for this opportunity. And Andrew, that was a good presentation. Kiran, thank you so much. And I'd want to thank Maria for inviting me to this session because it's a very important platform to share the challenges around the stateless communities and the minority groups. I come from Nubian Rights Forum, which is a grassroots organization. We focus mainly, as Kiran has said, on nationality rights and land issues. So Nubians were brought to Kenya by the British during the King's African Rifles in 1880s, 90s. So they used to be fighting for protecting the British colonies who came to Kenya. Every city where they were going, their soldiers, the people who were protecting the British were Nubians. So Nubians are discriminated in Kenya due to such history whereby you'd find many communities in Kenya, they see Nubians as collaborators of the British, and they are seen to be one of the people who led to colonization in Kenya, which is not true because this was not they didn't accept it, but they were forced to become the soldiers. This has led them to become at risk of becoming stateless. And a stateless person is someone who does not exist. And when I say exist, it means that in this world, we are led by technology, we are led by a document. And this document is something that will help you to travel like passport. It will help you to apply for scholarship, maybe at Tilburg. It will also allow sportsmen to be able to travel and become Messi in the near future or Cristiano Ronaldo. But the Nubians and stateless communities, they don't have this luxury, they don't have this opportunity because everything and anything is attached to documentation. In Kenya, for you to go to school, you need a birth certificate. For you to go to hospital, you require an insurance or a document that shows who you are. For you to qualify maybe for job opportunities or to travel abroad, you require birth certificate, parents' birth certificates for you to apply for a passport. And this has been the normal thing for the Nubian community. For you to also own land, you need to have a document. And these are the challenges that the Nubian communities have been facing. The Nubians are just but one of the many communities that face discrimination on access to documentation because they don't have any means for them to move. This has also affected NGOs, grassroots organizations, for them to receive resources, because unlike usual for any application of grants, you require audit reports, probably which has worked for more than 2 years. You'd require to also have a certificate to showcase that your organization has been moving and has been working. So you require also expertise so that they can be able to answer the log frames, to respond to the vision, to respond to the questions that are asked by the donor. These are some of the challenges that this community also do not have the luxury, because they are not learned. For you to be able to write a good United Nations applications or USAID application, you need to be a project manager. So that means you need to have gone to school, gone through internship, and understood the process of log frames and the process of highlighting mission and vision. But these communities fail to have this opportunity. Why? Because they cannot go to school. They can't apply for courses. They can't do literally nothing. So they depend on their normal knowledge, and their normal knowledge is the challenges that they do face. And these challenges that they do face led to the Nubian community to be able to look at new ways and approaches. These approaches is legal empowerment, sharing knowledge, using knowledge, and using knowledge to impact a change in an advocacy or on something. From the legal empowerment, we've been able to reach out to as many people as possible, such as paralegals. These paralegals, they work within the community on a day-to-day, and their work is to help community members who've lost hope in terms of applying for identification cards so that they can make their lives different. These communities also, the paralegals face challenges in terms of they require also expertise, and this expertise they don't have because they need an application and a donor who can be able to assist them. So when you look at all these challenges, is some of the things that has affected the stateless communities, because they are unable to progress. They have to speak in good and fluent English. They can't apply for funding with any other language. And there's also been gaps between the donor and the community. Most of the time, applications to support such communities, you have to speak online. You need to have more knowledge on how to read and also operate emails. Many of these communities, they cannot even operate these emails. So the answers that they give is merely different from the answers that someone who comes from a university can give. You find more communities not getting resources because of these challenges. Others challenges that you see these communities facing is that running for resources. Big NGOs, INGOs, they take all the resources because they understand the framework, they understand the themes, they're able to present their work locally, nationally, and regionally. So it becomes easier for them to be seen, to be visual. So their projects become good. Challenges, again, you'd see the communities, they can't be able to speak on the table. There is no platform for them to speak on the table. There is no opportunity, because for me to travel to Geneva, I require a passport. For me to travel to Geneva, I need to have good relations with UNHCR. For me to travel to Geneva also, I need to package my information. Even if personally I'm not happy about the way the situation is, but since I'm funded, I am forced to just use that position and go to Geneva to prevent my work. Based on these challenges, we decided to come up with human rights perspective, global movement against statelessness, to approach and use this mechanism in different ways. Instead of just having applications, we can be able to work with the community, get to learn what the community wants, What are the priorities of the community? Instead of the normal nature of donors coming with a proposal, coming with their own themes and giving out so that people can be able to write proposals. Sometimes communities require donors to come on the ground for them to see the impact, for them to feel the challenges, and for them to understand what are some of the challenges that this community needs and what areas do we need to support them. There has been tendencies, I will give example of Africa. It is seen there is lack of food, there is lack of education. So most projects you will see being on issues related to education, which is true, but sometimes you'd find in a community, their problem, for instance, the stateless communities, their problem is a document. Their problem is birth certificates, because these are the same documents children will need to go to school. So proposals don't really support these communities because they don't align with education. So the global movement against statelessness came together and we agreed to form, now I'm moving to the Global Stateless Fund from my previous conversation. This was a structure whereby we wanted at least to build solidarity within the communities, give communities unrestricted funding. I forgot to mention that sometimes funding that normally comes to support stateless communities are restricted. So for instance, you're supposed to do issues related to birth certificates only. You're supposed to do issues related to women. And this funding are always one time. So you will start a project and then within 1 year, a project needs to go for like 5 years, but you as a community, you'll be forced to finish the project and there is no renewal. So these communities end up not doing the project as expected. The funding from the Stateless Community Movement, Stateless Fund, was envisioned to be able to support those communities that do not have a voice, those communities that do not have a phone that they can be able to take, open a website and share their work, looking for communities that are unable to speak the normal language that a donor wants, so that they can be able to reframe their work and see how can they be able to speak for human rights and approach government entities based on their ways, rather than approaching government entities and human rights defenders based on how they want that approach to be taken. So the Global Stateless Fund is to support the stateless communities across the globe. And for the last 2 years, we've been able to support 36, over 50 organizations. And these organizations, we work based on references. We can reach out to any stateless communities or human rights that we've worked with, share the names of the communities that do not have funding, and then support them through participatory method, whereby we're able to approach and co-design the project together and allow communities to be able to use the unrestricted funding based on how they feel fit. One of the possibilities and positive things about this is it reduces stress from the community. It reduces also the effect of too much burden in terms of report writing, because you require a lot of time for you to write reports, and it also need a responsive impact that sometimes you'd find most communities, they don't have time to come and write these reports, explain to the donor, and at the same time fight for their human rights. So these approaches are some of the things that we've used, and we are hoping that we can be able to reach out to those communities that are not able to receive resources and find out how can we expound the issues related to statelessness, because it covers and it cuts across all the 16 or 17 sustainable development goals. Because for a refugee, they have a way of getting assisted. Unlike stateless communities, they are not asylum seekers. Stateless communities are discriminated and excluded by a specific state or a government. That is where I can stop. And if there is any question, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yasser. I just wonder, so as I've been listening to you in your talk, I've realized that there's several different languages, I guess, is one way to describe it. You have the stateless communities trying to speak to people about their questions of their rights and the fundamental issues of statelessness and to be funded to address them. And they're having to speak to people about development cooperation, rule of law, about education, about work, about law from lots of different angles, not only related to documentation. And it feels, from what I've understood you were talking about, that because they're having to communicate across these multiple languages, there's a sense of a loss of voice. What is it that donors in particular or wider development justice actors can do that would genuinely support stateless-led organizations like the Human Rights Forum to have a better voice in this context?
There is a part I missed about what is the role, please, if you don't mind, the last 3 seconds. Hello?
Yes, hi, are you still there?
Yeah, I was saying there's a bit I missed. If you could please repeat.
Oh, yes. So what is it that stateless or justice actors can do to support groups like the Nubian Rights Forum have a voice?
I think working together and putting prioritization to the stateless communities and not making stateless communities as by the way, because these communities, they are affected by all means. They are affected by climate justice. They are affected by urban migration. They are affected by traveling and everything. Education is affecting them. Health is affecting them because all this sustainable development have been linked with a document. For me to travel to Europe, I require a document. For me to open a bank account, I require a document so that I can showcase who I am. For me to also showcase how many years I've been in existence, I need to show a certificate. So if donors can be able to push and work with government officials and work with grassroots communities who understand the basic challenges and support them in various ways, for instance, giving capacities to these communities, giving them an opportunity to explain themselves on an international level so that they can be able to showcase the gaps and the challenges that they are facing, working together. I can say it's called the ladder of engagement. And this ladder of engagement is you don't necessarily have to wait for someone to take you on top, but the top person can also come on the ground and listen to what is happening and can also give an opportunity to someone who is at the grassroots to come into the top side and explain the issues on how to work together. And lastly, there needs to be more research about statelessness because nothing is written more in statelessness, and it affects gender discrimination because women cannot confer, they cannot give nationality to their children or their spouses. And if you cannot do that, then it means that person ceases to get opportunities from that area. So collaboration will really make a lot of difference and giving impact to these people who have been forgotten, an opportunity for them to speak on top. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yasser. Thank you again to all our speakers. We're going to move on now to be able to have a wider discussion. I can see there's already a question in the main chat. If you would like to, please also put your questions into the chat. Me and Maria will be moderating together. But just so that we can get started, I would like you all to just take a minute to just reflect. We've had quite a lot of information given to us, I think, from these three presenters. And I would like you to kind of reflect on this question. So how can localization of the rule of law and development cooperation continue, particularly to be funded and enacted meaningfully? What our two interventions have shown is that there are some real challenges, and perhaps even questions about what it means to enact localization meaningfully. And as Rima talked about in the beginning, there are quite some assumptions still in the field about what localization even means. And as we all know, funding is becoming a more and more urgent and serious question. So yes, I'd like to hand the floor over. Is there anybody who'd like to start, or any questions for our presenters? Sever, is it okay if I pick up from your question about the funds distribution?
Sure. I can also engage.
Please do.
Sorry, I'm on the go, so set by some river to follow this. Greetings, everyone. Yeah, I'm reflecting on this question. For me, I would problematize maybe key concept, because localization already I find problematic, and it's also criticizing on different sides, both practice and academia. And if we are talking maybe of locally led, because localization is again imposing top down, we are bringing something, and we are localizing our intervention, which is still intervention. Sorry if it's too much wind. Let me know if
no, it's perfect.
Yeah, so why should we localize ideas from the so-called global north or from some institutions of New York, Geneva, or The Hague? We don't need to localize something. I think we will be more attentive to traditional ways, to indigenous knowledges, to people solved conflicts and issues and built relationships that were not always harmonious in all those contexts. I think that should be the starting point to be meaningful, to touch upon another key concept. And then funded, I guess, again, thinking if building on participatory grant making, but also thinking of community philanthropy. And if we're talking of this flow of money from north to south, I think we should maybe be more daring. If there is a big crisis, not to waste it, but to think maybe we need to demolish all of this, to first do reparations for everything that was stolen throughout the colonialism, and then talk who is actually going to support through solidarity and not through aid and bitterness, whom, because Africa might end up being one of the richest places, continents in the world, and we might be relying on them. If really people own their own land, their own histories and materialities. So I think and that is bringing to assumptions, because assumptions are not about technical solutions, about linearity and causality and transactionalism, but about relational and solidarity. And so I'll stop.
Do you have a direct question for one of our speakers?
Yeah, but well, to reflect on this a bit, to try to dig deeper, and then very technical question for statelessness fund, where the funds come from, and to what extent they are through community philanthropy, or they're still from some donors, this or that.
I will ask Yasser first to answer the question on the funds. Where are the funds coming in from, and how are they distributed? If you could just answer that, and then I will ask Andrew to reflect on your comments.
Right now, the funding comes from Blue Sky, Martin O'Brien, Martin from Blue Sky, Ford Foundation, Porticus, and I think in Porticus, we've been trying to reach out to different individuals that can support our corporations, because funding is all about relationship building for these stateless communities. It's about having in conversation and stipulating the challenges and the gaps that these stateless communities do face and how they can be expounded. How we fund is it's through global movement. There we have a team of stateless communities and individuals who are working on statelessness. So the approaches that we use is references, referral from the global movement, referral from partners, referral from any individual who's worked on issues of statelessness. And then after that, the next steps is working with that communities and then getting to learn what are the work that they do. If they do qualify to the stateless fund, we are able to give them from starting with $12,000 to $36,000 per year for a period of 3 years. It's not a huge funding, but at least it's something that can support an individual to be able to be out there and speak their mind. So we are still developing, and we're still looking towards on how to make it a huge project and huge funders so that we can make difference to the world and to the stateless communities.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have any reflections based on Seva's question?
Sure. I guess I'm thinking maybe at a more higher level, but in terms of now, first we had to close the justice gap, then we got to deal with the trust gap, and now there's clearly a financing gap, which is, I think, always been there, but now exacerbated or by the ODA cutbacks. But so we're looking at some serious resource constraints, whether it's for localization or just other things that we're doing. So I do think we're going to have to think through not only the new models and frameworks for funding and financing, but also the sources. There's an expert in the field who I've gotten to know, who's focused a lot on financing justice, who will give the line, we need more money for justice and more justice for money. So we need to find the adequate financial resources, and we have to deliver in a more cost-effective outcomes and results-based manner. So bilateral donors, I think we're going to have to look to other emerging donors from the global South that are playing a role, and to really sort of explore that, on the multilaterals and the international financial institutions, there's some role to be played there. I see there's a question about the private sector. I think a big issue there is in how do we have the private sector engage? And I look to others who are probably more experienced with this, but my sense is de-risking is important for that private sector investment. So whether it's the donors, the bilateral or the multilateral donors, have to be help in that de-risking for the private sector to feel comfortable. I think, as Teresa asked, how do we make the case for them and and philanthropies to do more on justice? I mean, we've been trying to crack that nut, so to speak, for a long time. But I do think investment in the business case with the data that shows the direct impact on whether it's GDP or other aspects of development remains key, along with the ability to communicate that effectively to a variety of audiences. We need to do a lot better there. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but this is, I think, one of the obvious priorities for us in the rule of law sector and development generally.
Thank you. Teresa, would you like to add any comments to your questions around engaging with the private sector?
Oh, I think Andrew is right. Oh, I mean, we've got to have the evidence, we've got to have the data. We've got to help them understand that link. I think there's a link, but that can, a case, as he says, a business case that can be made, but people who are working on delivering health outcomes sometimes maybe are not seeing how rule of law issues impact their ability, the corruption that can come in local health systems, laws that may impact that. And if we can make that kind of connection and show them that long term, they're spending a lot of money here, that while it's doing great things and they're showing great results, it's not going to hold up over time if there's no rule of law system. So I think, again, it's making that case, and we can't just say that. We know that to be true, but we have to have that evidence and show them and make those kind of links. And I think that's important. And I, also realize that we may not be able to get the amount of funds from some of these organizations that we had at USAID, for instance, but it's a start. It's somewhere to look and to build on. And so I think it's important that we look for all resources at this, moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Rima, do you want to reflect on anything that's been said?
Thanks, Kieran. No, actually, well, I just added in the chat as well to the question about creating a case for rule of law for private sector and philanthropic organization. I think, in my experience with working for an intergovernmental organization, this certain conversations happen between governments, and so I'm not sure how to what extent what kind of access philanthropic and private donors can have to those conversations. However, I think going back to the assumptions, one of the assumptions that we also try to address in the report is that rule of law does not equal state and government. So what could be done in this situation is perhaps looking at non-state actors and at community initiatives and traditional justice systems that are not kind of included or not so directly related to the state, and work with those on community level. And perhaps that's also a way better entrance and way more organic fit for organizations that already work on with communities on, for example, health or education or environmental initiatives and so on.
I certainly think that's very interesting as well. I mean, how do we go about? I'm not too sure how to term it, but like fostering these kind of moments of encounter between these very disparate groups. Like you said, like a lot of these decisions happen within governmental structures, which are very opaque, generally speaking. And then, of course, we have the private sector, the community-led organizations, the NGOs. There seems to be so many disparate groups. I think, like you were saying, we need to have a little bit more of those connections. And as Yasser was talking about with his ladder of engagement, what are your thoughts, and this is an open question to everyone, on creating these moments of encounter? How can we go about making better connections? Yes, Seva, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it brings us back to this relational versus transactional. So we are talking about how it's important to be relational, how it's important connections, how there's encounters, trust. But then we end up talking about, we need to build a case and to sell it to someone else and keep on doing things. So I think we need to fundamentally differently do things, not to make the case and expand it, but really these assumptions are calling for whether we need to do at all something, first of all, to start asking yourself, and then how. And that is fundamentally different. So, especially, I mean, in the context where equitable partnerships are utopian thought, as exemplified with passport, even when one has a passport, getting to spaces is so unequal thing. So partnerships, you know, how many times many of us were probably in situations that the key person who was supposed to contribute to the event wasn't there because they didn't get visa, because they got stuck somewhere, because they were held at the border. I mean, it's utopian thought. So we need to dig deeper. How we can actually, what kind of equitable partnerships we're talking about? What kind of really is it tweaking and sanding edges and patching holes, or really fundamentally rethinking? Because I was ideational background and the underlying ideas and principles of the sector. I did my thesis in 2015 about the policy shift in the Netherlands from dialogue from MFS2 to dialogue dissent for those working in Dutch context that maybe means something. And what are underlying ideas? And ever since sector said like, oh, we are reinventing ourselves, but we are actually tweaking. And this like, oh, let's find just other source of funding, but is just a bit adapting, but not really fundamentally rethinking. So I would like, again, maybe to encourage us to try to dig deeper in these reflections. If it's a big shift, then
what does it mean to reimagine? What would
yeah.
it mean to genuinely reimagine this whole sector? I can see that Greg, Mark, and John have made some comments. Would you like to pick up the conversation?
Hi, this is Mark Dietrich from East West Management Institute in Washington, D.C. And thank you all for the super interesting discussion. And I guess I just wanted to underscore the comment I put in the comment box that the funding has been important to our local partners overseas, but also knowing in the case of USAID that the U.S. government and USAID itself was standing behind the activities that they were undertaking, helped them and protected them. I'm thinking of the most recently, and Andrew knows this, we were implementing a large project in Georgia, and yeah, our partners, pretty sophisticated groups there, valued the money and welcomed the money, but I think they more valued having us standing by their side and advocating for international human rights standards and for other international standards relating to judicial independence and the rule of law that we always tried to link our work to. So that's the only point I wanted to make. And also I would just say that localization means really getting into each individual country, and within each country understanding the ability to absorb things, including money and advice from the international donor community. And some groups are better able to do that in some countries than in others. And it was always a challenge to figure out how to get funds with all the strings that are attached to USAID funds to informal groups that were sometimes doing really important and interesting work. And when you have the large international requirements, that can be a challenge. So this is an opportunity for us to rethink that and to try and have different approaches to support those types of groups. Thank you.
No, thank you. And what would your thoughts be on, particularly if we want to move away from the idea of risk and funding and think more about the way that you've termed it around safety and protection, what measures then would be more helpful to be able to support these groups? Or how might institutions be rethought with that as a focus?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I would just add that, the large donors like USAID, because they're funded by the US Congress or were funded by the US Congress, are very risk averse. So it's, it just takes one, example of abuse of funding or loss of funding to get before a committee in Congress, and you have a full-fledged crisis on your hands. And so there's the USAID and the US government funding mechanisms were very, very risk averse for the most part. And so I think in one way, the fact that we're going to have to be coping with smaller amounts of money also means that we can undertake more risky interventions and better support different types of local groups.
I honestly thought you were going to say
not
the
sure
opposite.
if I answered your question, but
No, thank you very much. Yes, so you want to speak?
I just wanted to also add on to like the shift of power to local decision makers. At least localization, communities define what the justice look like. Donors also must move from just supporting individuals, but partnering, co-designing interventions and with locals and paralegals so that you can understand what is happening. Stopping to just fund ecosystem, but projects so that we can be able to understand more rule of law. Investing in communities, education is important, local accountability structures, developing corporations that can work together, integrating the learning and mutual understanding and accountability so that we can be able to learn from one another. Then championing local voices in global spaces so that they can speak and share their stories, and then the implementers and the supporters can come on the ground and really see the facts that are happening. Giving an example, in Kibra, you'd find sometimes people coming and taking photos since the donor can't really come to the ground. People will be told this is the projects that we've done, but literally nothing has done. So for accountability is something like that. Big NGOs will depend on individuals or these grassroots organizations to do a specific project, and then for them, they will just respond with a line on the organization that they worked with. So leveraging these opportunities together so that it is not just a sub activity, but it is a human right activity that changes someone's perspective based on projects and long-term funding.
Can I just jump in and add to this as well? We looked in this research. We also looked at the concept of risk in development cooperation and in projects, and how current system is incredibly skewed towards risk assessments and risk scrutiny towards local organizations without considering that local organizations are also running risks by engaging with international actors, external actors, and to I think to really see a shift in the system and to embrace new ways of working together. If we do not throw the whole system out, as Sever suggests, but still keep some of the elements of it, then I think the way forward is to really embrace risk distribution, so risk sharing between between partners. And departing from this concept of risk management that a lot of donors, such as USAID and the Dutch government and UN organizations, are still using, and instead see partnership as a whole. So as a community, including international donors and local organizations and every actor that is involved, who share a common goal and who therefore also share the risks that come with this project or initiative, and not just analyze each send endless questionnaires to try to look into the future and predict whether a certain project will not work or not, and frankly, often kind of letting local organizations bear most of the risks of such work.
Thank you, Rima. Andrew, you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, thank you. I think somewhat related to the risk sharing, but I also want to pick up on Greg Gisvold's question. I don't know if it's provocative or not, but on problem solving, which I think he's on to something. I did try to suggest earlier, one of the things that we need to continue doing is catalyzing stakeholders and coalitions. And in many ways, I did mean for problem solving, that we must find more effective ways of identifying and bringing together the variety of institutions and actors. If it's not to define the problem, then it's to address or solve the problem, and maybe even innovate in doing that. Yeah, but the question is, who does the catalyzing and the coalition building and the convening? Who has the legitimacy as well as the capability? And going back to this issue of trust, which gets a little bit at Mark's intervention and my characterization of U.S. government and USAID as ghosting our partners. We lost that trust, I believe. We forfeited that trust. And how do you have serious partnerships without that trust, as well as the risk sharing? So, yeah, so that is something, though, but should we identify a problem, Greg, based on data that someone will fund or otherwise collect, analyze, and message on, and then we bring the right people around the table, and as someone said earlier, not just a seat at the table, but a way to shape the table, having locally led that, and then solve that problem. But I think instead, we still need the funding to do that.
Yeah, I was also going to pick up on Greg's point about siloing. A lot of my work moves more and more towards participatory, practice-led research and action, which means working with communities to define the problems, find out the assumptions and the questions. But as you said, who leads that, who funds that still shapes the table. So I think we certainly have our work cut out for us. Yes, Maria.
I just want to add something, related to John's, and I think it was also Teresa's point on how to make the philanthropy organizations understand that they can fund education, they can fund healthcare, but if they don't address the justice needs, what's actually going to happen? And yes, as an organization, it's not just because I'm a huge fan of their work. You should definitely check out the Nubian Rights Forum's work, but it's also because they clearly show that, you know, the paralegal approach that they take of legal empowerment, of helping people go through the path of obtaining their documents, allows those persons who have now obtained their documents to even access any of these education or healthcare initiatives. But I guess donors don't see that if they don't come to the ground and, let's say, have I don't know, a community forum, join one of the Nubian Rights Forum's community forums and actually hear from people how that the paralegal project, which to me is a form of, I mean, it's people-centered justice. It's people also taking the law and the legal knowledge into their own hands and helping people from their community walk through the path. Yes, that can maybe intervene if he wants to expand a little bit more on that. But it's something that I think these organizations don't always see, and you guys are completely correct. And how to make that more visible. I was wondering if there are like resources, like, for example, I don't know, creative storytelling or coming up with like participatory policymaking frameworks or something that can bring that more grounded engagement into the eyes of the people who need to see it, so they can see that actually their vision is a bit narrow and that they will not accomplish what they want to accomplish without seeing that actually justice is the foundation for everything for anything to work. Justice is really at the base. So if you have any ideas on possible tools, approaches, I think these are the things that need to be, I guess, incubated a bit further now that things need to change.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to try and tie a few things I've heard together and certainly launch off of Teresa's comment, which I commented on and you've commented on. I'd like to give us all a little perspective. I think Andrew and I are in the same age group, roughly. And we both started our careers around the same time, a very optimistic moment, fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War. We're running around with ABA, used to be called SEALI, trying to fill this massive gap that Congress at the time understood existed. An opportunity to move from autocratic governance to democracy, to bring rule of law to places that had never had it. And that was the 90s. And arguably, we hit a high water mark. I don't know. Arguably, we got distracted by Iraq. I don't want to get into the weeds of all that. But we did move. ABA, SEALI became ABA ROLI, and we went around, got into Africa. One thing I've noticed, and this is certainly a criticism of USAID and Congress, as I worked in both the Balkans, places that have gotten a lot of rule of law, justice, development love from the United States. There were and there was somebody commented earlier about the 3 steps forward, 2 steps back of a societal ownership of their rule of law. Coming into a country that has been in conflict and giving them a 4-year project and dropping them like a bad habit at the end of it is not helpful. It's happened to me twice, once in Liberia after a terrible Ebola. They were just getting out of their civil war. Ebola arrived and left them devastated. The bar had 40 paying members. I left with 500 paying members of the bar because of USAID, coming in and doing that, training magistrates. But as we left and achieved everything we came to achieve, there was no follow-on project, nothing. USAID was mute during Trump 1.0. But then I thought, well, gee, I'm now going to go to Somalia, and I did the same thing in Somalia. Andrew knows well, we achieved quite a bit, hit all of our marks, and really got things moving in a good direction, starting a wonderful conversation about building an ethics code based on Sharia law that had never existed in Ethiopia before. They'd had so-called judges that were being asked to be equitable, administer justice equitably without any concept of what their judicial ethics were in that process. We went into the Hadith and the Quran and we came up with an ethics code. It's quite an accomplishment, only to have that rolled out as and having them, the Somalis, actually start taking an interest in an old thing called Garsor Dardwene, an old traditional jury system that they used to have prior to the Italians and the Brits showing up during the colonial period. And they were going to try and bring it back. And this was such an exciting moment for us feeling like we were on the front end of what we did in Bosnia and Serbia and Kosovo, 20 years of knowing that there's going to be a 3 steps up and 2 steps back. Governments change. You're still dealing with, folks that are trying to cling to the old ways. There's going to be disappointment built into that. We used to understand that, and I suppose the United States in particular, and perhaps other parts of other European states have seem to have lost the long-term buy-in that's required to change people's lives in a sustainable way, that this really is a process. So I wonder, when Teresa mentioned the Gates Foundation, and I happened to be in New York visiting my daughter, recently unemployed by Trump 2.0. I was supposed to be running a project to help the Tigrayan conflict resolve with USAID funding when that was canceled. I happened to be home, and the Colbert Report, the Stephen Colbert show was on, and my daughter, knowing I was pretty depressed, got me tickets with her, and we went to see his show. And it just so happened to be the show in which Bill Gates announced that day on the show that he was going to, apparently recognizing the urgency of the situation that we were heading into as humanity, that he was going to start letting his money flow a lot faster than the foundation was planning on. And he, in that statement, during the course of that interview, rightly focused on the urgency of healthcare and the mosquito nets and the rest of the stuff that he does. But he also said education. And so when I mentioned my comments in the chat there, that he needs to be hit between the eyes with the knock-on effect of educating and getting these justice and rule of law education out into the public, localized into the public sphere, is the fast-track way to have those societies have a better, that by focusing on that as the core, a lot of the education deficiencies that persist in the developing world could be tackled as well. So I just wonder whether, evolutionarily speaking, this global community that we're a part of, that once was divided by a Cold War, where there was no real conversation about any of this, because we were just focused on that. That it all got into this wonderful era that we were in my youth, the 90s and the 2000s. And we started to hit a snag, roughly around 2010, 28, 29 with the Great Recession, and it got worse from there. The corporate world has been, sometimes in very ugly ways, sort of taking charge, arguably wagging the dog of nations. And when you see a multi-billionaire like Bill Gates get on national television and chastise Elon Musk on one day, and then the very week later say, for Elon Musk for ending all of the healthcare that was going on through USAID. And then the very next week go on and say, I'm gonna double down on this. We're gonna get this money out the door, and it's gonna go half to education. It strikes me, and I'm not the only guy, I can't be the one that does it on my own, but it seems to me that there's a critical mass of people, some on this call and many of your friends that know that corporate avenue to funding these things. They have the money, they have the global reach that they built through the internet-driven global economy that they really benefited from. They have leverage and they have goodwill generally. Seems to me that getting them more actively involved, perhaps the Gates Foundation is the obvious, one of the obvious targets. Open Society Foundation is another. That some of these, let's say, if not the Americans, the European states could be rallied around that new energy from them to do sort of in parallel to what they did in Ukraine when Zelensky was treated quite
Well,
badly
I
by.
think Ukraine is a whole other
Well,
rather complex subject.
It is. So I'm trying to use that as an example of you noticed how the Europeans rallied to Ukraine's defense the very next day. And I'm suggesting that there's a potential combination of
Yeah.
these corporate philanthropies working together with the Europeans to rebuild. That was my point.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your contribution, John. I'm just going to ask everyone, we're going to be wrapping up now. I would like the speakers just to give me a one-sentence take-home message that you would like to leave our audience with. Rimba, would you like to start? Just one sentence. What should we take home?
Sure. Thanks, Kieran. Well, it was such a rich discussion. I don't think I can summarize my takeaways in one sentence. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we are at the crossroads. We are living the crisis, and sometimes it's hard when we're in it to see the way out and to understand there's as so many processes are taking place at the same time. So I think we should keep all possibilities open, a very open mind, as Sever suggested as well, about even more radical approaches and everything in between. Thank you. Thanks everyone for contributing today.
Thank you, Rimba. Andrew, would you like to give your final thought?
Sure, Mike. I guess it's linked to a little bit to John and to Mark, but in response to the failure for USAID to follow on and follow through on investing in justice and rule of law. Okay, the one sentence is priorities change because people change within these institutions, and that churn comes at a huge risk. That random ideas can replace thought through strategies to some extent. So we need continuity, and hashtag leadership matters. And who tends to remain? The local leaders.
Which brings me to Yasser. Would you like to have just a one-sentence summary for a take-home message?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. What you've said really reflects, and it's important. And before I finalize my statement, I think to just look at sustainable development goals, especially Africa, it's like states are just doing things because they have a time frame. States are not doing things because they're making a difference or want to impact. So that is a very huge challenge when it comes to assisting communities. But I would say justice for statelessness, minority communities begins with trusting local leadership and resourcing it through flexible grassroots funding, not just as charity, but as resistance and dignity. This will go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Maria, would you like to just wrap up, please?
We just want to say thank you so much for being here. In particular, thank you so much to our speakers, Andrew, Yasser, and Rima. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak at today's event. And we also want to say a special thank you to everyone at the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law. Next week, I believe, is their last week. And a special thank you to Sever, who is here today, who was such an important support throughout the project. From the second it was funded, he had been there supporting us, and now it was amazing to have him here today as well. And a special thank you as well to Christian and to Evelyn, who have continued supporting the creation of this event. And I think that's it. Well, also thank you to the Thrive Institute, the researchers, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for having engaged with us throughout the project, and everyone who granted us an interview. Some of you are present here today. Thank you so much. And we do hope that this has sparked a good conversation, that perhaps there are some ideas that might be incubating there. If you need to get in touch with any of us, you can find our email addresses here. And you can find Yasa and Andrew on LinkedIn. And as well, you can expect an email from us in a couple days, most likely sometime next week, with probably a summary of the discussion today and most likely a link as well to the recording. We're looking into where we can upload the recording from today. We're seeing if it can be on the KPSRL's YouTube, but we have to see about that because they are indeed shutting down. But we will update you on anything through email. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Asa.